Hi, this is the memory chapter. Remember, memory and cognition do kind of go together. I teach them separately. A lot of textbooks do separate memory and cognition. It'll take about 2 videos just to do memory, but this is an important chapter. I think that this is a useful chapter. I don't think that everything I teach you is useful in real life, but I do think the memory chapter is useful. Okay. All right, moving right along. Okay, so why which one of these pennies is the correct penny? Okay, hit pause if you want to spend more time on this. I mean, even I don't know the answer. I think it's bottom left or bottom right. I forget. And I've been teaching this slide for 10 years and I still don't remember. Why don't I remember? Why why is this so difficult? And when I ask students this, students will sometimes say, because we just don't care. And I say, that's the perfect answer. We just don't care. You don't remember things that you don't pay attention to and that you don't bother to remember. Our brain can only hold so much, okay? And so we tend to not actively put things into our brain that just don't really matter. Okay, so what do we call that when we just put something into our brain? When we purposefully try to remember something, like for school or for work or something like that. We call that encoding. Okay, encoding is when you put something into the brain. So the reason why it's difficult to know the correct penny is because we haven't encoded that information. And therefore we haven't stored that information, meaning keep it in the brain. And therefore we cannot retrieve it easily. Retrieving it meaning to pull it out of the brain. Okay? So these are the 3 basic tasks of memory: encoding, putting it in, store, and then also elaboration is part of encoding. It's when you try to make it meaningful to you. Like, I always try to use memes when I can. I always try to make funny jokes about stuff. I try to be relevant. I mean, if I don't, fine, whatever, I don't care. But try to make it so if I teach you something that is useful to you, that's part of encoding. Okay? It makes it a little bit better. It's what we call elaboration. Storage is keeping it there. Okay, so, and what we find is that storage isn't perfect. We don't have perfect memories of things in the past. And retrieval is getting it out. We also call that recall. Okay, but getting it out of your brain. Okay, now I'm not asking you to write this down. Now, if I were to use a computer to describe the levels, to describe the tasks of memory, these 3 things, the task of memory, would be this right here. So ways to encode information would include the keyboard, maybe even downloading it from the cloud or downloading it from a server, or even maybe through a USB device, or in the old days a CD-ROM or a DVD-ROM. Storage would be the actual hard drive. Like, I actually have videos on my hard drive that I keep on my hard drive. I guess you could say I store videos on YouTube as well. That would be storage. And then retrieval would be through your screen to get it off of the cloud, to get it off of the hard drive. Okay, write this down. Now, these are the tasks of memory. I don't think it's important that you know that these are the tasks, but you do need to know the difference between encoding, storage, and retrieval. Hit pause, write this down. I'm moving on. Remember, the space bar is pause, usually on a video. All right, so getting information into the brain is called blank. Getting information out of memory is called blank. Okay, hit pause, look at your notes, and you should be taking notes. Remember, taking notes is part of encoding. Okay, there I just used a term. Okay, all right, so we're getting it out of memory. The answer here is C, encoding. It's encoding is putting it in, retrieval is getting it out. Storage would be just keeping it there. Okay. All right, so let's talk about encoding. All right, can you remember this? So if I were to ask you a minute from now to remember this, could you do it? It's not easy, is it? Okay. Why is it so hard to remember? You might remember that it's written in all capital letters. You might remember that it's written in groups of 3. So the fact that you remember that it's in groups of 3 and that it's written in all capital letters, that's called structural encoding. Okay? You remember the structure, but you don't remember anything else about it. So this is really hard to remember. Now, could you remember this? Ma, fa, ra, ba, ga. Yeah, I think this would be a lot easier to remember. You could even make a song out of it. Ma, fa, ra, ba, ga. That would be a lot easier to remember. This, you can't even say it. And it's meaningless. Okay, but the fact that you can say it and sing it, that means that it's easier to remember because of something called phonemic encoding or acoustic encoding. Don't write this down. Okay? So this is easier to remember than this. This is hard to remember, even though you remember the structure. This is easier to remember because you can make a sound out of it. But it's still hard to remember. It takes a lot more effort. Now, let me ask you this. Now, you'll write this down in a second, okay? But semantic encoding has meaning to it. It's a lot easier to remember something that has meaning, okay? So which one of these lists is easier to remember? The bottom one is much, much easier to remember because the bottom list has meaning to it. FBI means something, so it's easier to remember. The CIA, the IRS, that has meaning to it. But the stuff above doesn't have meaning to it at all. That's true of numbers too. Like, for example, if I had to remember, let's say 75, that would be an easy number for me to remember because that was the year I was born. But and 76 would be easier to remember because of the Declaration of Independence. But if you just give me a random number like 14, if I can't attach some meaning to it, then it's hard for me to remember. Okay? Why is the number 420 easy to remember? Because it has meaning to it. So draw this on your notes. Hit pause and draw this on your notes. This is called levels of processing. And semantic, which means meaning, and go ahead and add that to your notes somewhere. Semantic means meaning. It has meaning to it. Semantic encoding is a deeper level of processing. So it's much easier to remember than, say, acoustic processing or phonemic processing. And the most shallow level of processing is the visual. That would be structural encoding. I don't think you need to know structural encoding or acoustic or phonemic encoding. I have not seen that on the AP exam. But you do need to know the term levels of processing. Okay? So if you wanted to remember ma, fa, ra, ba, ga, make a song out of it. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Well, make a song out of it. Do, a deer, a female deer. Re, da, 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 da. Okay. If you can make a song out of something that you want to remember, then that gives it acoustic, but it also gives it semantic at the same time. That's why when you can make a song out of something you need to remember, it always helps. Okay? All right, here we go. The word big is flashed on the screen. A mental picture of the word big represents a blank code. The definition, large in size, represents a blank code. Sounds like a pig represents a blank code. Okay, look at your notes, those notes that I know you're taking. Okay, go with one that you know for sure and then use your process of elimination. All right, moving right along, but hit pause, but the answer is structural. You know, if just the word, the vision of the word. Semantic is the definition. Phonemic, phonics, phone, sound. Okay. A memory code that emphasizes the meaning of the verbal input is called what? Okay, the answer is semantic. Semantic means meaning. That word semantic is going to show up again in this class. All right, now so here's an AP question. In a memory study, the experimenter reads the same list of words to two groups. She asks group A to count the letters in each word. And she asks group B to focus on the meaning of each word for a later memory quiz. During a recall test, participants in group B recall significantly more words than participants in group A. Memory researchers attribute this effect to differences in what? Okay, hit pause, look at your notes. The answer is levels of processing. So group B got to use semantic levels of processing, and group A was just structural. Okay. All right, write this down and draw this on your notes. Hit pause. All right, the serial position effect says this. It says that if I were to give you a list of things to remember, you are least likely to remember the beginning. You are least likely to remember the middle of the list. But you're more likely to remember the first items of the list, and you are most likely to remember the last items of the list. The primacy effect, prime, primo, first, are the first items in a list. The recency effect are the most recent items that you remember hearing in the list. So your dad gives you a shopping list. If you don't write it down, then you're gonna remember the last items because that's the last thing that he said. But you're also gonna likely remember the first items. It's also true with job interviews or meeting your girlfriend's parents for the first time. First impressions, last impressions. All of that makes a difference. And also think of the word serial. Think of the word series. What is a serial killer? Okay. And by the way, when I analyze a word like this, I'm using semantic encoding. Okay. All right, moving right along. Draw everything on here. Okay, so think of a series. Think of the word serial, means being in a list. A serial number. Okay. Dexter is a series about a serial killer. Good show, by the way. The first 4 seasons or 3 seasons are just TV gold. Okay. So again, you already have this written down, but the primacy effect is at the beginning of the list. The recency effect is at the end, and in the middle, you are most likely to forget. I mean, you might remember, but it's hard. And here's an outdated meme. Okay, moving right along. When Sue memorized her shopping list, she got to the store and forgot many items from the middle of the list. This is due to what? The answer is the serial position effect. Okay. All right. Elena is presented with a list of 20 numbers. When asked to recall this list, she remembers more numbers from the beginning than from the end of the list. This phenomenon demonstrates which of the following types of effect. Okay, look at your notes that I told you to write down. The answer is primacy effect. Prime, primo, premier. When Sophie reads her history assignments, she goes over them very carefully and tries to memorize each fact. Emma, on the other hand, studies by trying to relate the new information to things she has experienced, been told about by others, or seen in movies and on television. Emma's performance on history test will probably be better than Sophie's due to differences in what? Okay, so Sophie just memorizes fact after fact. Emma relates it, so it's a much. All right, the answer is Emma memorizes it on a deeper level of processing. Think of like semantic versus structural. Mary is introduced to 3 new people at a party. Later, however, she cannot remember the names of any of her new acquaintances, even though she remembers what she ate, her old friends who were there, and the address of the host. What may account for Mary's inability to remember these individuals' names? The answer is D. She didn't encode them. And I believe I would assume that introverts have a harder time remembering names because people are not that interesting to introverts as much as extroverts are. Okay? All right. The chart above illustrates which of the following psychological concepts. The answer is, hit pause if you need to, but the answer is serial position effect. Okay? In memory experiments on free recall, the recency effect refers specifically to the what? So think of recall as like just remembering off the top of your head without any clues or anything. The answer is B, at the end of a list. The most recent thing you heard. That's recency effect. Encoding is effective when you pay attention. You have to pay attention. Selective attention, if you don't pay attention, your sensory memory will hear blah, blah, blah. I'll explain what that means in a second. You have to pay attention in order to get information into your short-term memory. So if you're not paying attention, then you're not going to encode stuff. Just like with the penny, if you don't pay attention, you're not going to remember. Okay? All right, write this down. No, hold on. No, before you write that down, I want to show you something. All right, put your phone down and pay attention to this.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13.
Good job.
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go! So selective attention is when you are focused on one thing to the exclusion of other things. Write this down. Okay? So you're so focused on one thing that you tune everything else out. A good example would be a student on his or her phone during class, and you just tune out everything else out. And it can be a good thing when you're driving, you need to focus on being safe rather than focusing on, where's a good ramen place or something. You got to pay attention, okay, to your driving. You got to be careful. Okay, so this is a good and a bad thing. Okay, hit pause if you want to read that. It's just a funny joke. Okay, all right. All right, the ability to choose specific stimuli to learn about while filtering out or ignoring other information is called what? The answer is selective attention. Focus on one thing, tune everything else out. Okay. All right. Research has shown that a major reason for poor performance while multitasking is that while multitasking, people do what? Okay, hit pause. The answer is what? Yeah. All right. Moving right along. All right. Self-reference effect means that we can remember things that are important to us. And we tend to not remember things that are not important to us. Remember earlier the example of remembering names at a party? If you don't like people that much, you're not going to remember their names. Okay? Write this down. What is the self-reference effect? We remember information that is personally relevant. So if you want to remember cheat codes because you like a game, that's easier to remember than, say, something involving schoolwork, assuming you don't like school. I'm not assuming that, but sometimes it's more fun to remember things that are relevant to us. Okay? Or if it's for your job and you'll get a raise. True story, I had to remember 1,000 zip codes when I worked at UPS because they said we will give you $1 raise if you remember these zip codes. And I did. I got out the note cards and I wrote them down and I memorized them. And I worked there for 7 years. So that's a lot of money to remember 1,000 zip codes. It wasn't easy, but I was very motivated by money. Okay. Or if an attractive woman wanted to give me her phone number and I were single, then yeah, I'm more likely to remember it. Okay, moving right along. All right, write this down. State-dependent memory. Okay, hit pause. I'm going to start talking. So, studies show that if you encode something in a certain state of mind, then you are better able to recall it or retrieve it when you are in that same state. So I'll tell you my biggest nightmare. Let's say I teach all year long for AP psychology, and then um, somebody gets in a fight with their boyfriend or with their girlfriend right before the AP exam. That's a nightmare. Why? Because if you study your stuff in a good mood, but then you get angry before the test, you will be in a different state of mind. Okay? It's like if you get drunk and then you learn something while you're drunk and then you get sober, you may not remember it until you get drunk again because you'll be in the same state. So moving right along, there was a study done where this guy named Baddeley, he studied underwater deep sea divers. He would have divers memorize stuff above the pool, and then he would have them go underwater and then give them a test of memory under the water. And the divers didn't do very well when they were asked to remember stuff while underwater, if they learned it on dry land. The opposite was true too. If you asked them to remember it underwater and then bring them up to the dry land, then they couldn't remember it either. So if you're going to study underwater, then you test underwater. If you're going to study dry, then test dry. Take a moment and really look at that graph and try to understand it. It's kind of hard for me to explain. Okay, hit pause, but I'm moving on. In an experiment, either a sad video or a happy video was shown to participants to influence their moods. The participants were then asked to memorize a list of words. Later, the participants were again shown either the same video they had seen before, memorizing the words, or they were shown the other video and they were then asked to recall the words they had memorized previously. Read it again, and I might actually accidentally give you the answer here, but this is the graph that goes with it. So if I show you a video to make you sad, then I ask you to remember the words, then you'll remember it fine. But then if I show you a video that makes you sad, and then you study the words, then I show you a video that makes you happy, you may not remember the words. So if you're going to study sad, then test sad. If you're going to study happy, then test happy. So yeah, that one's hard to do on a PowerPoint. That's called state-dependent memory. Think of being sad or happy is a state of being. If a subject is asked to remember this list of numbers in 10 seconds, which numbers will she most likely remember? Okay, hit pause if you need to. The answer is remember the serial positioning effect, the first and the last numbers. Dan was drunk, so his girlfriend convinced him to get out of his car, and she drove him home in her car. He could not remember where his car was parked when he got up the next morning. But after drinking some liquor, Dan remembered where he left his car. This is The answer is state-dependent memory. Being drunk is a state of being. All right, moving right along, let's talk about storage. Storage is just keeping it in your brain, okay? Just storing it there like on a hard drive, even though that's not how our brain works. Write this down. What are the 3 stages of memory? Now, you don't need to remember that these are stages, okay? But you do need to know what is sensory memory, what is working memory, short-term memory, and what is long-term memory. That's what you need to know. All right, hit pause. I'm moving on. Okay, so let's talk about sensory memory. It only lasts about 2 seconds, okay? On the next slide, you will see a series of letters for 1 second. Try to remember as many as you can. Okay, pay attention here. Ready? All right, how many do you remember? Okay, so that is visual sensory memory. It's almost like it burns an image on the back of your eye, you know, your retina, the back of your eye. That is sensory memory. That is visual sensory memory. Okay, we call that iconic memory. By the way, sensory memory lasts for about 2 seconds, and it turns out that visual sensory memory is shorter than auditory. That's why sometimes when we have to remember something for a short amount of time, we say it out loud. Like I'll try to log into a website and then it will text me a number. So I have to remember from my phone the number to type it into my computer. So I say it out loud instinctively because I know that I can remember hearing it longer than I can remember seeing it. Like a verification code, for example. Okay. Sensory memory traces fade fairly rapidly. We simply lose the information unless we do something further with it, meaning you have to pay attention and you have to want to remember it. Remember this morning when you went outside and there was a bird singing? No, you don't, because it was in your sensory memory and you didn't bother to remember it. So you just didn't even bother, unless you just were particularly interested in that bird. But if you don't pay attention, then you lose memory of it, just like the penny. I don't know how important this is, but you've got iconic memory, that's visual sensory memory. Okay? Think of an icon. Okay? Like Rosie the Riveter is an icon for women in World War II. Echoic memory. Echo, 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 sound. So echoic memory lasts for about 3 to 5 seconds, while iconic memory lasts for about 2 seconds. All right, moving right along. Working memory, also called short-term memory. It's what you remember, it's what you tend to remember without rehearsal, meaning without sitting there and repeating it. So you might remember something at most for about 20 seconds, and that's at most. Okay? So short-term memory, you already have this written down earlier. Short-term memory, also called working memory, can hold unrehearsed information up to 20 seconds. And it can hold between 5 and 9 items. Fortunately, phone numbers are they're about 8 items. phone numbers. You got the area code, and then you've got the following 7 numbers. But short-term memory can hold 7 items plus or minus 2. So it can hold between 5 and 9 items. That's short-term memory. And it can hold it for about 20 seconds. And rehearsal is when you repeat it. Write this down. Rehearsal is repeating something to keep it in your short-term memory. So if I give you my phone number, and then you might sit there and say it 2 or 3 times to remember it. A couple of years ago, we had to do that with quizzes codes. I got a quizzes code from my student on my computer, and then I had to remember it long enough to write it on the board. Did it every day, almost. Okay. So you ask somebody, what's your Instagram name? And then you have to say it a few times so you can remember it long enough to type it in your phone. So if somebody attractive gives you their phone number, and then you have to repeat it a few times before you find your pencil, that's rehearsal, maintenance rehearsal, to maintain it in short-term memory. All right, let's try a few. Okay, so remember, in your short-term memory, you've forgotten it for about, maybe you forgot it after about 20 seconds. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to ask you some multiple choice questions to get you to think about it again. So by me asking you multiple choice questions after I teach you something, that is an example of rehearsal. Okay? All right. The capacity of short-term memory or working memory is about what? The answer is 7 plus or minus 2. About what a phone number is. Which of the following increases the chance that an individual will remember a telephone number that has been called several times within a short period? The answer is rehearsal. Repeat it. Repeat it. So if you work in a grocery store and you keep having to type in the number for tomatoes, you're going to remember the number for tomatoes. An individual's recall tends to be better for information that is personally relevant, primarily due to which of the following phenomena? The answer is self-reference effect. So if it's important to you, you're more likely to remember it. If you can take information and relate it to you personally, then it's easier to remember. So if your mom is bipolar, then you're going to remember what is bipolar more easily. Okay? And then finally, long-term memory. Long-term memory, we think it's unlimited, but we don't really know exactly. Okay, you need to write all of this down. Now, I put a little heart next to everything that I have seen on the AP exam. I haven't seen declarative memory, but I have seen semantic and episodic many times, and I have seen procedural. So long-term memory includes semantic memory. Remember earlier we learned about semantic encoding? Well, now I'm teaching you that semantic memory is meaning for, like, say, the definition of things, like knowledge, facts. Episodic memory, think of your life as a television show. And your 5th birthday, or the time that you pooped your pants in school, that is an episode of your life. It is a time of your life. Procedural memory, Think of the word procedure, things that you know how to do, like playing a musical instrument, or riding a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, things that your cerebellum is good for remembering. Ah, a little brain there, a little bit of brain part there. Make sure you know your parts of your brain. But yeah, your cerebellum is really good with procedural memory. Okay. So semantic memory is, I know the definition of a guitar. I know what a guitar is. Episodic memory is, I remember buying my first guitar. I remember that time. And then procedural memory, I remember how to play a guitar. This is a part of your brain that deals with memory. The hippocampus converts short-term memory into long-term memory. All right, so if you damage your hippocampus, you're going to have a form of amnesia. Okay, the amygdala processes scary or stressful memories. That's so the hippocampus and the amygdala are very close together. Okay, flashbulb memories. These are memories that we don't forget because of the emotion involved. Okay, you'll never forget. Try to think of something that you will always remember. Maybe the January 6th Capitol insurrection, for example. For my generation, it's September 11th, 2001. For my parents' generation, it's the Kennedy assassination. Things that they will never forget. Or it could be something personal like your first kiss. That's a flashbulb memory. All right, remembering how to roller skate involves which of the following kinds of memory? The answer is procedural memory. Think of roller skating as a procedure. Episodic would be that time you roller skated. Semantic would be what is a roller skate. Your knowledge that birds fly, that the sun rises in the east, and 2 + 2 is 4 is contained in your semantic memory. Semantic memory. I want to move on. A teenager would most probably draw on which of the following to recall her 10th birthday party? All right, so if it's a time in your life, then it's remember your life as a TV show, and your 10th birthday party is an episode of that TV show of a life. Carlos sustains a head injury. After the injury, he is able to tie his shoes, but he does not recall where he lives. Which aspect of the man's memory is intact, and which aspect is dysfunctional, respectively? Respectively means in the order. So the first one will be about the tying of the shoe. The second one will be about not remembering where he lives. That's what the word respectively means. Okay. All right, be careful, but the answer is, so semantic is how to do something. No, I'm sorry. Procedural is how to do something. Semantic is knowing what something is. Like fact, like knowing a fact or something. All right, that's enough for this time. Thanks a lot.